been postponed twice, so third time lucky. Let's also hold thumbs that there's no power failure. I don't think there will be, but there is a chance. So if I suddenly disappear, it's because of, what do they call them? Not forces of nature, but yeah, that sort of thing. Something that's kind of out of my hands. So good to see some of the members here. I think we're up to 21 members. Even though I think other channels might laugh at those numbers, I don't know. I guess I'm new to this, and I'm quite appreciative of each one of you. So it's also quite a nice intimate group, and I don't know, at the point I am right now, I would rather deal with small groups asking questions and people that know me than people who don't know me and that whole process that it takes to get to know one another. So it's good to have you here, Terry, Lisa Bennett, Bria's up quite late. It's, I think, 11 o'clock in France at night. I think Stephanie's joining us a little bit later, and Jean maybe as well. So in this episode or this live stream, we're going to be talking about the laundry case. We're going to be talking about two aspects to it. The one is how the one video that Gabby made, how it sort of fits into the timeline, right? And then, so we're going to talk about that aspect, and we're also going to talk about the psychology of Brian Laundrie. And I haven't really felt comfortable, just myself, I haven't felt comfortable with a sort of sense that, first of all, I understand Brian as a person, as a character, that I understand his psychology, and then secondly, how that played into the events in the Grand Tetons, how the crime, the dynamics of the crime played out psychologically. I've got an intellectual grasp of it, but I don't really have a sense of how that dynamic played out practically, in terms of how that psychology actually kind of manifested. And so I've not really been satisfied with that. And then I kind of had what I thought was an epiphany. And you're going to laugh when you hear where it came from and how it happened. But let's see how apt it is, when we get to it. It's strange, on my phone, the image is really the way I want it. The background is exactly square, but then on the screen, I see it's kind of not in the proportion I want. So my OCD is sort of kicking in. SM Kovalinsky, good to see you here as well. So I'm also going to be taking you through another case. Well, welcome, Kathy. I think Kathy's just joined us. I'm going to take you guys through another case. It's actually a South African case, the murder of Jill Peckham. And there's some really interesting intertextuality going on there. I didn't expect to be talking about that in this live stream, but it does involve a vehicle. It does involve a couple, much older than Brian and Gabby, but it does involve a couple. And it's just, there's some things that I thought were really interesting in terms of that particular case. So I'm going to just discuss some aspects of that very quickly, and then we'll go on into the Brian Laundrie thing. Axie's here, Sharon Tuck, good to see you here as well. Okay, so the Jill Peckham case was one of the cases, high-profile South African cases, that kind of got away. And what I mean is, at the time, I was writing a series of books on the Henry van Breda case, a triple axe murderer, 20-year-old guy who murdered his family with an axe. and I was actually attending that murder trial in person, and there's quite a lot to say about it, but the point is, while that case was being heard, while Henry was on trial for murder, this other case occurred, and for various reasons, I just wasn't able to deal with it. I wasn't able to pay attention to it, and I've kind of shifted it to the side. It was constantly making the news, and I was sort of like, I can't focus on this case. I don't have enough energy, time, resources. I just can't do it. And so that particular case kind of went off my radar. And I've actually just watched a really good documentary. Even though I didn't really pay much attention to the case, I did have a basic idea of the basics. And so having just watched this documentary, it kind of filled in a couple of gaps that were really interesting. Kathy says, I was knocked out of Patron and had to sign up again. Sometimes what happens with Patron is the payment, I kind of get a sort of a notification saying how many declines there are. So sometimes a payment doesn't go through for whatever reason. And then, it might be a problem with a bank. It might be a problem with just the whole system that's going on. So that can be how you can get kicked off. Stephanie, good to have you here with us. So the reason I want to talk about the Peckham case is for a couple of reasons. The one is it involves a vehicle being used to dispose of a body, and then it also involves very interesting intertextuality. And that's really all I really want to talk about. So just briefly, the third dimension to that is also the motive. Why was this necessary to happen? And part of that, the journalist who covered the case kind of said that the perpetrator, Rob, her husband, just snapped. And I never liked that assessment. I never liked the whole he just snapped thing. You hear it in almost every case. You hear it in the Chris Watts case, the John Benet Ramsey case, that Patsy just snapped. You hear it in almost every case that somebody just snapped, and that's the reason why something happened. And I don't like that assessment because it fragments the dynamics and the relationships and the fault lines of a case, and it kind of makes it very random. It's got nothing to do with all sorts of things that were playing out in the background. The person just snapped. Why did they snap? Kind of thing. And that aspect plays into what we're going to be talking about with Brian Laundrie. Did Brian just snap? And there is some truth to the just snapping argument. I do think there is a switch that goes off and the person commits a crime, but I don't think it's like, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. They're already primed. They're already stressed. There's already anxiety. There are already strong forces playing in the background. So you need to be aware of those in order to understand how the snapping takes place, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Kathy says, I've been with TCRS for 2 years, very weird, when I could not get on the live. Yeah, it's just a membership thing. It's not, I think it's quite new to some people. Obviously, if you want to ask a question, you can just super chat as well. You don't even have to be a member. Bria says, great to be here. Bria also says, I hate the snap thing. It's like they're just evil. Yeah. Stephanie says, thank you to all who are subscribers and also members of TCRS. We appreciate you. Okay, so let me very quickly give you some of the circumstances in the Joel Peckham murder, and then we'll get on to Brian's psychology and the nomadic static video. I also want to tell you this very funny little anecdote regarding Timmy's playmate, Ivy. Two funny things happened today regarding her. So remind me to mention that. I was actually going to open with this. I thought there would be fewer of you. I thought I was going to open with that anecdote, but maybe I'll close with that instead. Nice rocket there, Stephanie. Actually says it's like folks in recovery saying they got struck drunk. Yeah, it doesn't happen that way. Often when people lie or disseminate, for example, let's say someone is caught out in an affair, then it's like it just happened. You know what I mean? It's like the idea is that, excuse me for what happened. It's got nothing to do with me. It's like I just kind of accidentally stepped into a puddle of mud. You know what I mean? It's just pure bad luck. That's not actually how it happened. There's many decisions, many temptations, many fantasies, many small little things adding up to that actual behavior. Yeah, takes away responsibility from perpetrators. Stephanie says, I'll remind you. Okay, thanks for that. So briefly, what happened in the Peckham case was that a blonde woman disappeared. She was married. She's quite attractive. And she was a teacher. And then so she kind of just disappeared, and then I think her sisters put up a missing person thing on Facebook. So they didn't call the police. It was first on Facebook, and so she didn't show up for work. That was sort of how it started. This took place on the 22nd of February 2018, and that's an important date. We'll come back to that. And anyway, what they ultimately found was that, first of all, they caught I think it was a BMW, a dark green BMW. They caught it on CCTV footage slowly driving past certain homes, and they later recovered the vehicle. It was totally burnt out. It was kind of on fire, and they found a dead body in the trunk of the vehicle, and it was sort of unrecognizable, but you could see the rings on her fingers weren't removed. That was one thing. There were a few strands of hair that weren't burnt. Of course, there was a lot of fire accelerant used, and so the car totally burnt out, and very little was left of the human remains. But they were able to establish, first of all, there was surviving DNA. They were able to establish that her name is Jill Peckham, and then they were also able to establish, because the skull, the bone, was something that wasn't totally incinerated, and they were able to find very serious blunt force trauma, like when the what do you call it? I guess the coroner, which is more like some kind of specialist. I can't remember exactly what do they call it? Designation was, but she showed a sample skull, and she showed an area of the jaw where the bone is particularly reinforced and strong, and there was a fracture to that bone, and there's another area of the cranium that's also a very strong part of the skull that was also had this blunt force trauma. And it's quite interesting. They never found the murder weapon, but they did find an axe that had the handle of the axe and the axe head were sort of in separate pieces, and they found the axe handle and the axe head and the handle kind of tucked into linen in the garage. They found no DNA on it, but they thought that this is quite strange. The axe would be the kind of thing that could have caused, I'm talking about the blunt end of the axe, not the sharp end. The blunt end of the axe would have been a sort of dead ringer for the sort of thing that could have caused those injuries. And it appeared as if the attack occurred in the garage. It also makes sense that it would take place in the garage because she was put in the trunk of her car and her car driven some distance away. Actually says they can tell a lot in autopsy. Why I think it's quite relevant to the Brian Laundrie case is you have a situation of blunt force trauma and then the effort to dispose of the body. In this case, the body was put in the trunk of the car. Somebody that I watched the documentary with said, oh no, was she actually burned alive? And I said, before knowing really the details, that's really unlikely because she would scream and all that kind of thing. So anyway, she was put in the vehicle, driven a short distance away, the vehicle set alight. And this is the part that's really crazy. Just as in the Brian Laundrie case, you actually had witnesses. In the Brian Laundrie case, you had people seeing the van, right, where it was. And in this particular case, another vehicle, an Audi, a white Audi, was actually seen driving from a man leaving the scene, getting into a white Audi and driving off. And the amazing thing was that this witness actually managed to remember a few, not all of the license plate numbers, but a few of them. And also, what's the other thing? That it was a white Audi. And then anyway, it turned out that those license plate numbers matched up with Rob Peckham, Jill's husband. So some of those numbers that were remembered were in the actual number plate. Not only that, he drove a white Audi. When the police tried to impound the Audi, they couldn't. They really struggled to get hold of it. The guy also changed his tires. That was also a factor, and journalists said that there was nothing wrong with the original tires. There was no need to change them, but obviously tire tracks were left next to the other vehicle, if that makes sense. And so the incredible thing about this crime was, as crafty as it was like he was caught out immediately. It was like there was no way he was going to get away with this, right? There's no way that they weren't going to pin it on him. What I found quite interesting, I don't know whether I knew this and forgot, but the same prosecutor prosecuted the Van Breda case, prosecuted this case. She won the Van Breda case, in other words, she got a prosecution. She won this case as well. Her name's Susan Galloway. I actually spoke to her a little bit in court. She seems like a sweet lady, but she's actually very tough, and she says that it's important not to get sentimental, to be anchored in the facts. And anyway, she's a really great prosecutor. Stephanie says observant witness. So the question was, why did this take place? Why did this crime take place? And I think it's quite interesting to think about the personality and the dynamics of one couple. This is quite a, totally different situation. It's a kind of a middle-aged couple living in the suburbs, quite wealthy people, and compare it to Brian and Gabby. Now, in some ways it's completely different, but in other ways it's quite similar. And these are some of the ways it's different and similar. So one of the impressions that people had was that Rob was wealthy, that the husband was wealthy, that they had a happy marriage, that everything was the fairy tale. They were living in a nice suburb, and on outward appearances, they seemed like a well-to-do, nice couple. But then as you got closer to these people and you dug around and you asked around, it turned out that one of these individuals was leading a double life. Who do you think that was? One of these, one of the couple was kind of living a double life, like had a second kind of identity, if you can put it that way. Which one do you think it was? actually says outward appearances. So it turned out that Rob was kind of a swinger. He was, how can I put it? He had not just one mistress, but he had multiple mistresses. And he also wanted to stay married. He kind of wanted to be married, and he wanted the sort of home life, but he also wanted, put it this way, wanted his cake and eat it, right? And no, so his wife seemed to mostly was in the dark about his affairs, but she did eventually find out, and she wasn't very happy about it. And it came to a head when I think they were going to marriage counseling, and he let slip that he still had feelings for his mistress. It was kind of like, I still care about her. And his wife was extremely upset. And literally what happened was both his wife and his mistress kind of said, it's either her or me, right? Do you follow? So his wife kind of said, you know what, you need to stop having an affair, especially with this particular woman. But the mistress, who is funny enough never identified in the documentary, for some reason there was like a protection thing going on. I think she did testify, but the bottom line is she actually said, it's either you've either got to leave her or leave me. That's it. And then you had the situation where the husband wanted things both ways, realized he couldn't have things both ways, but then also wanted an instant divorce. And so you had a very similar situation as in the Chris Watts case, where he was telling his mistress that they were already separated, and that things were, the marriage was sort of kind of at its end. Meanwhile, they were going through a little bit of marriage counseling, but the marriage is very much a marriage. And so how do you get, if you're desperate to have this affair work out, how do you get an instant divorce, right? And bear in mind, just like in the Chris Watts situation, it was actually Jill that controlled the finances. She kind of had the money in that situation. And so he was trying to get control. The other thing that came through quite interestingly was that this guy was a very controlling person. He absolutely demanded control. And I think what you'll find is there's a relationship between very controlling people and people who are actually inadequate, insecure. In other words, there's a need to control because you don't have control, in a sense. There's a need to over kind of control because of some kind of insufficiency from the controller. That makes sense. Robbie Robin, welcome. Wants his cake and eats it. So the prosecutor said it was quite easy to rile up Rob Peckham when he was on the stand because he wasn't used to being confronted by a woman. And she also said it probably helped the fact that she was a female prosecutor. It just got him more kind of riled up, and he wasn't used to being sort of how can I put it? If she didn't accept an argument he made, and she kept hammering on it, he would then get angry, and then that would show that this guy was prone to snapping, that this guy was a controlling person. And when he didn't get his way, the frustration would build up to the point of snapping. Now, you can imagine that just in an ordinary argument, you're in control, someone kind of won't do as you're saying, and then you just kind of lose your temper. But now this is on a much higher scale. It's the end of a marriage. It's what to do with all the treasure. It's I'm desperate, I'm having this amazing affair. It's so wonderful. I'm desperate to keep it going. And so how does that desperation manifest in a super controlling person, right? And plus you've got all of these appearances where, well, you know what, how's it gonna look if we get divorced? So what if she just disappears? Let's make it easy for everybody, right? So he wasn't calling the shots, yeah. So I just found when when you first faced with a crime, you're like, wow, this is terrible and incredible. But when you start figuring out how the dynamics work, there's an inevitability about it. There's a sense of, you know, what really needed to happen was, and I think the prosecutor did say this, who's a woman. She said something like, you know, it's a pity that Jill didn't just leave the marriage. You know, she knew her husband was cheating on her. It's a pity she didn't just leave. If she did leave, she'd still be alive today. It could actually even have been her sister that said that. Now, I think if a man had to say that in a situation like this, it would sound a bit like victim blaming. You know, why don't you just leave your relationship? Why don't you just leave your marriage? But I think it's quite important to apply this to people who are alive and potential victims of crime. When your marriage, your relationship is going seriously downhill, maybe just leave. You know, maybe when there's infidelity, don't try and hang on. It might put your safety in danger. And that then brings us to the Gabby Petito case, and you've got to ask, so what from the one case is relevant to the other? And I think Brian was fairly controlling. We don't have too much evidence of that, but one does kind of get a sense during the Moab incident, which I haven't actually covered for a while. I've been meaning to, but one does kind of get the sense that he takes control by kind of blaming Gabby, and Gabby kind of puts quite a lot on herself, if that makes sense. The other thing that we know for a fact, and this is really important, is we see that Brian doesn't seem to like social media very much. He's got a bit of a gripe with corporations and the way the world is being treated. To some extent, it's legitimate. But the other side of it is, you know, they're in a relationship, they're engaged, and at this stop in Moab, Gabby says right in the beginning, she says that Brian hasn't been supporting her with her blog. He's been a bit of a downer. He doesn't even think that she can do this. And whether you want to call that being controlling or undermining, he's nevertheless not helping, if I can put it that way. He's, for whatever reason, maybe he's insecure about the social media thing, maybe he's got a kind of a philosophy against it, but he's not really on board. And for me, it's quite incredible that they embark on this summer epic, you know, with the idea of the whole van life thing and the social media, but Brian's not really going to come to the party as far as that's concerned. And that's why it's quite important to look at the one and only video they put on their channel, the Nomadic Static channel, and see what is actually in that video and what isn't, and also the timeline of that video. And we're going to do that. I see Karina's here. Good to see you. Lisa Bennett. He didn't like being called out. Stephanie says leave, but have a plan. Yeah, that's right. So how many of you here have watched the entire just under 8-minute video that Gabby put up from beginning to end? Andor, good to see you here. Good to see you. Andor actually let me know that I put up the wrong Alec Baldwin video, I think, and very early on, so I was able to correct that mistake. So let me ask you guys again, how many of you have watched the full beginning of van life journey that Gabby put up on the Nomadic Static channel? Quite an interesting question from Bria. What do you think of Cleo's family having decided to do the van life thing now going forward with their family? My understanding was that they're leaving Carnarvon and I think they're getting a caravan, but the way I understood it, I could have missed it, but my understanding was when they go on holiday or when they do that, they will be using a caravan. But maybe I misunderstood. The other side of it is if they've just gotten the bonus of $2 million, then maybe they should take a little bit of a trip. They did say something about that they haven't gone camping for a year because of the situation. So it is kind of ironic if that is what they are planning to do. I think things could be quite different, though. I think because of the virtual celebrity status that they have, they could how could I put it? They would get a huge audience paying attention to what they were doing. It just would seem a bit odd given what has happened, that everyone is watching their movements. This is Cleo doing this is Cleo doing that. It's like, is that really appropriate, right? So who knows? Actually says no more tents, yeah. Yeah, at least I won't be in a tent. Bia says, I guess van life and Winnebago life isn't the same. So let me ask this again. Let's try and get an answer from you guys. How many of you guys have watched Gabby's video, beginning our van life journey? The whole thing, the whole 7 minutes, 59 seconds. Any responses? Ando says she's watched it. Stephanie, I'm shocked. I'm shocked, Stephanie. Karina also hasn't. Terry says she has. Actually says not the whole thing. Okay, so it's a little bit understandable that you're a bit hesitant to answer. So I must say, I don't know when I watched it or if I did watch the whole thing some time ago. I presume I did, but I've watched the whole thing a couple of times in recent days. And what is quite interesting is that, so first of all, it's 7 minutes, 59 seconds. Bria says yes. Sharon says me. Okay, good. Kathy says I watched. Okay. So what is quite interesting when you look at that video, by the way, it's been viewed 6.6 million times. It has 42,000 comments. For me, what is really important is when it was posted, the 19th of August, 2021. It was posted literally 8 days, almost a week before Gabby actually died. And she writes here, a glimpse into our adventures, ! Our first cross-country trip in a little Nissan Sentra. We both decided we wanted to downsize our lives and travel full-time. So it's like they both decided to do that, but trying to fit everything for two people into the tiny little trunk of the car, also spending way too much on gas, which he mentions first, food and Airbnb was not the road to take. We quickly realized we had to come up with a solution if we wanted to continue traveling and living nomadically. So that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to travel and live nomadically. That's what they decided. and she says, so that's why we handcrafted our own tiny van, a simple 2012 Ford Transit Connect, utilizing space with unique designs and features, creating a space for both artistic expression and distance hiking. And that almost sounds like she's saying, with the van, we've created a space for artistic expression, whatever you want to say that is, drawing, whatever, and then also distance hiking. But one kind of wonders what actually they wanted to do with the van. Do you know what I mean? As kind of making a life out of it. She goes on to say, thank you so much for watching, and we hope you tag along on our journey wherever the van takes us. And then she says, follow our van life journey for some awesome van life ideas, tips, hacks, camping spots, and so many beautiful places to travel. So it's pretty ambitious. She's talking about that, they are going to be the inspiration to a lot of other people. They're going to provide ideas, tips, hacks, camping spots, blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, they provided this one video. And I don't want to sound cruel or unkind, but I don't think it's a particularly good video. It's sort of the first 4 minutes is snippets from not the van life thing. It's sort of Gabby driving the Nissan Sentra. It's kind of little clips from a previous road trip, including to California. So it opens up with a sort of a zoomed out view of the Bonneville Salt Flats, right? And then it kind of jumps to, I think, San Francisco, which is a totally different vehicle and trip, and situation. And then, so the first 4 minutes is really sort of fragments of a different time. And that sort of makes you think, wow, in late August, they still didn't even have enough material to make one video. And they'd been traveling for a month and a half. And then the second half of the video, the sort of soundtrack kind of pauses, and there's a little bit more of the Gabby and Brian that we know, the places that they visited that we know about coming up in the video. And there's far more of Gabby talking and Gabby's appearing in the video than Brian. Brian's very last appearance is kind of goofy. He talks about all the way from New York, he wasn't able to put up his hammock, and then finally he's been able to put up his hammock. And so Brian kind of almost gets the last word. It's not that he says much in the entire thing, but he kind of says the last word, and he says something about, we put up the hammock, and there happen to be some trees in this desert, and then he sort of laughs. And he kind of starts off fairly well, but he sort of ruins it with this really goofiness. And you can kind of also see where she's talking that they are both very young, very naive, very kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and your heart goes out to them. But in terms of the quality of the video, it's not really that great. It's not like if Gabby and Brian were still out there today, this would have been a roaring success. Obviously, with time, they would have gained experience and confidence, like any YouTuber. But certainly what Gabby produced there wasn't going to win an Oscar or a YouTube award. But to me, the important thing is what Gabby's thinking when she makes the video, and also where she was. Where did Gabby get time and opportunity to make this video? And that's a question I don't think has come up very often. Like, the video was put onto YouTube on August 19th. Where was she when this happened? Did Brian help her make the video? What kind of mindset was she in when she made the video, right? And so we're gonna sort of talk about that in a moment. Let's just look at some of your comments. Sharon says, definitely a newbie vid to get content out. Yeah, I mean, most of it is sort of arbitrary soundtrack music. And, they are kind of playing, she's on a Ferris wheel, and it's sort of, if the idea is to impress the audience, wow, this is our van life journey, you'll be quite surprised the arches, those incredible arches from that park in Moab. I don't think that appears at all in the video. There are some pretty cool Instagram photos and scenes that just aren't in the video at all. And so what is in the video is kind of cheesy, kind of so-so. And there's really not much that's particularly amazing. You see Brian and Gabby on a beach with a fairground in the background, doing handstands and sort of dancing around, but it's not terribly impressive, right? We are interested in it because of this case becoming so high profile. But if the case didn't become high profile, I don't know whether ordinary Joe Blows would have paid too much attention to it. Bria says, photos of them seemingly traveling in love. Sky, good to see you here. Oh, she says, I didn't get any notification. Yeah, I did announce this, but then I postponed it. So Karina says, even then, he seems like an appendage already. Lisa says she didn't look happy at all after Moab. Yeah. Karina says fluff rather than content. I quite like the scene where she's inside the tent and she talks about, it sort of jumps to a clip where it's in the middle of a storm, and you really get a sense of Gabby as a fun, young, spontaneous, vivacious, attractive, innocent young woman. You kind of get that sense of, she's pretty, she's sweet, she's cute, and she has a bit of a, how can I put it? She has a bit of a charm in terms of the camera, whereas Brian doesn't really seem to. He doesn't really seem to want to be there. Terry says Gabby didn't even post it until Brian had left her. Good point. So I'm going to take you guys through the timeline. I don't know if you've seen it anywhere. I certainly haven't. But we're going to look at where this video fits into the timeline. And we kind of want to start approaching this idea of what was going on with Brian. What was his psychology? What was his attitude to the social media? Because I think it's one thing to say he disapproved of the social media, or he felt uncomfortable, or Gabby's social media was gaining more traction than his was. And let's face it, when they embarked on the van life thing, they both did post on Instagram. And I think the reality is she gained more followers, not like thousands or millions, but on a fairly small scale. She gained more followers and got more interaction, whereas he didn't. And that can feel quite invalidating. You can feel like not just personally insulted and invalidated, but also, while my partner sees that I don't really have much social power, you have more going for you. And what does that mean, kind of thing? Do you know what I'm saying? And then there could also be comments there, unsolicited comments that can be quite revealing, and that can make things a lot worse as well. Thanks a lot, Becky B. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, so I'm going to take you through Gabby's video, beginning our van life journey. It was posted on August the 19th. just 1 week, almost exactly 1 week after the Moab incident. Well, sorry, it was posted exactly 1 week after the Moab incident. So just think about that. We know during the Moab incident that Gabby was complaining about the fact that she was so frustrated trying to work on her blog, and that Brian wasn't helping, and that Brian didn't believe in what she was doing. She was tearful, almost like grinding, bitterly unhappy, because you kind of got the idea she's trying to do something, and she also had to deal with Brian's dirty feet and Brian just not really helping, in terms of that aspect. You kind of got the idea that, she had to worry about things like water and dirt and Brian's mood, I guess, when she needed to be busy with what she was doing. So I think the other thing that's important to bear in mind, and let me quickly ask you guys this question. How many of you guys here have visited Gabby and Brian's blog? They mentioned the blog in the Moab incident, or Gabby does. I think Brian also does. I think Brian says something like her little blog or something. How many of you guys have actually gone to the blog? Endo says she came across as very attractive on social media and he was kind of not. That's it. Lisa says she had an amazing outgoing personality. It makes a difference. Endo says it's fine not to be as hot as your partner if you have a great personality, but Brian didn't have that either. Karina says, I bet he purposefully distracted her because he wanted her attention on him. So that's probably how he saw it, was if Gabby does social media, she's going to do more social media. She's going to be pulled away from him. Bear in mind, he's almost married her, and there's been a little bit of difficulty closing the deal. Possibly one of her parents disapproves, and that crack, if you want to call it that, in their relationship could get worse if social media has its way. And so maybe he wants to, in the same way that Rose Davis said, he was always worried he would not be enough. Well, wasn't social media going to prove that? And so he wanted to keep her off social media. And of course, how do you have the van life thing happening without social media? And Brian may have had a plan. Maybe the idea was you get endorsements, you get certain companies to sponsor you as you sing their praises in different environments. And so you don't really need to be so visible, in terms of you can endorse these things without, if that makes sense. Maybe that's how Brian saw it. So Sharon says no. Stephanie says nope. Anda says didn't see the blog. Okay, so if I'd written a book on this, I would definitely have directed your attention to it. I did make quite a few videos on this case, and I did put a particular screenshot of the blog, but it's kind of like says under construction. There's only one page, and it kind of says under construction. So you're not really missing anything, but it is very important that you go to the blog for the reason that the blog, like the YouTube thing, is like still in the starting gate. It's kind of being set up, it's being built, but you kind of, certainly me as someone who's blogged, those who know me know how crazy I've gone on Crime Rocket and Crime Rocket 2. A lot of that energy goes into Patreon now, but, just a heck of a lot of blogging. And so here is a couple who are a month and a half into that venture, and the blog isn't actually even live. There's no content because they haven't finished the back, what do they call it? Not the back office, but they haven't finished what they're trying to do. And so, yeah, they are far into their adventure, and they haven't even done the basics. They don't even have the blog set up, which had to be super frustrating for Gabby. And they don't even have YouTube videos going. And I don't know, I would imagine that thus, in terms of, let's say, August 12th, had they made any money in terms of their adventure? I would say no. Had they made any progress whatsoever? Well, a few followers on Instagram doesn't really count for anything, right? Stephanie says background, yeah. Backstory. It had no content, yeah. So, so that's kind of where Gabby was. Gabby really wanted to get the blog going, but ultimately, where we are today, in terms of the blog, Gabby never got it off the ground. And so what that shows is, for whatever reason and however that played out, Brian, I don't know how to put this, Brian maintained a kind of control. In other words, Gabby wanted to put the blog up, but she wasn't able to do it. Why? Because somehow Brian got his way and they did other things. You know what I mean? They didn't do the thing that they were actually there to do, which was to try and monetize their trip and to turn the trip into videos and posts and all that kind of thing, and also enjoy themselves. Sky says, oh yes, I forgot about that. Okay. Yeah, look, they were selling clothing and some artworks prior to them selling off, but once they were on the road, I don't think that was continuing. So they did have a little bit of a piggy bank before they set off, but in terms of the actual trip and what it was supposed to be, that never really played out. And I think what's quite interesting is, we're going to get to it in the timeline now, I'm going to go to that. Gabby's father actually had to order her a dinner, possibly because Gabby had no money. And so you don't want to be in that situation where you've thrown everything into this van, and it's not just that you get into the van and you drive and money rolls in. Every day you're in the van, you're using gas, you've got to eat somewhere, and who's going to pay for that? Well, the van life thing's supposed to pay for that, but if you're not doing things in anticipation and with a good work ethic and regularly, then you're not going to make anything. And Gabby put up one video, and other YouTubers will be able to set me straight on this, but as far as I'm aware, I know that you can monetize shorts and that you can have a little bit of advertising there, but somewhere I was led to believe you've got to have an 8-minute long video, I think, in order to have mid what do they call it? It's not mid-credit rolls, but a kind of an advert in the middle of it. And because Gabby's channel was new, and because basically for that reason, even today, although that video is made as garnered 6.6 million views, it hasn't made a cent because she never got to the monetizing stage. I think when you've got 1,000 subscribers and a certain amount of views, might be 5,000, then you can monetize it. Well, they never even got to monetizing their YouTube. And if Gabby and Brian were both still alive, let's say Gabby did disappear, Gabby did just go into Yosemite, but then she came back, and in her absence, everything kind of exploded. Who knows, that video could have been worth a fortune. Probably not, given, it's one of those weird Van Gogh scenarios. You can only tragedy is going to allow the sort of traction that you actually wanted. Without the tragedy, you're not going to have any traction. By the way, don't forget tomorrow's show on Van Gogh. Can you see the face over there? We're going to talk about Van Gogh in episode 3 tomorrow. Actually says it was her dream. Stephanie says, I forgot I saw it because it wasn't much, blank, under construction. Ando says, imagine Brian having to deal with the kind of snark Nick gets in comments, for instance. It would never work. He could not handle the criticism. Yeah, I must say, I'm more than twice Brian's age, and I get told that people think I'm 70 years old based on my voice, that I'm from India, all sorts of really not nice things. But, if you, my age, it's not the end of the world. But if you trying to create your identity and you worried your girlfriend might notice some of these things, there you go. I almost get on I won't say a daily basis, maybe a weekly basis, I get people saying, I'm so arrogant to call myself the most authentic voice, and I just don't have the time or energy to go through the explanation again that it was something someone said in a book review and I really liked it, and I'm aspiring to it. But, just very, very often people will say, you are definitely not the most authentic voice or something like that. And, one can really take offense. If it's truly, nasty, then I just block and don't deal with it. I certainly don't really engage. If it's a bit more conversational, I might sort of deal with it. But, if you don't have any sense of self, you can imagine that can... Bear in mind, Brian was also bald at 23. That can also be a bit of a difficult thing because most guys don't go bald that young. And so that can definitely be a source of insecurity. Sharon says, you sound 25. Yeah. Okay, so, sorry. Let me just go to the script that I've written here. So if I was in Gabby's shoes almost halfway through the summer epic and not having put anything on social media, I'm just saying, if I was Gabby in that situation and I haven't put anything on social media and it's already a month and a half through the trip, no videos, no blogs, just a few self-serving, neither here nor there Instagrams, I would have started feeling pretty antsy. I would have felt like the walls are kind of moving in. We're running out of money. This isn't going to work. We've got to get going. And, it makes you wonder, was Brian like in a dream world? Like, wow, so nice going to this park. Where did he think the money was going to come from? Bear in mind that they're quite young and they were probably getting handouts from both of their parents, but that can't carry on forever, kind of thing. I can tell you as a YouTuber, I've traveled with others and it's difficult to sort of put up a stop sign so that, to say, guys, stop, I need to make a video or whatever. In other words, so that you've got the time and space needed to concentrate and create. It's difficult to do if you're not totally in it together, then it's really mission impossible. I've been in that situation where you think you're going to do it and then it just doesn't really happen because it's quite demanding to expect other people to just drop everything and wait. Now, there is a channel, I put a link to this on Patreon. There's a channel, maybe I can share it with you guys here on YouTube. When I run on my treadmill, I love playing the videos from Team Charles Barkley. It's a husband and wife team of triathletes. They are both really hardcore, tough, talented, amazing couple, and they've got almost 72,000 subscribers. But it's just amazing how hard they train and what they achieve. But they are a husband and wife team sharing their journey in terms of triathlon together. I think a lot of their footage is recorded by the sister of Lucy Charles. So I think it's her sister that is sort of hanging around and making it all happen. But this is an example of a husband and wife pair who are kind of on the road a lot, traveling a lot, and it really does work. Although I prefer watching her, and I think I could be wrong, but I think Lucy's the more accomplished triathlete. I've also watched videos of Reese training, and he's also a really good athlete and good triathlete. But and I think they're a really good-looking couple because they're triathletes. But personally, I prefer watching her. I don't know what she experiences and what he experiences, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a general sense of, because I think she is a world champion. I'm not really sure what his claim to fame is, although he is definitely a good triathlete. But there's a good example of a couple where they seem to be in it together and it does seem to be working. So let me put a link up for you guys. If you're interested in just seeing this particular okay, Anda, there we go. Teamwork's great. Actually says, is there evidence that he was committed to a dream? That's a good point. I think the question is, like even the title of the video is Gabby and Brian, not Brian and Gabby. And that's why the video is quite important, is Gabby edits the video, Gabby compiles the video, and how much of Brian is actually in the video? And the answer is not much. It's mostly Gabby talking. She's trying to include Brian, but there just ends up being a lot more of her in it, which seems to show that he doesn't really want to. Okay, so let's just go through the script. Lisa Bennett, thanks a lot for that. So I would have, if I was Gabby, I would be feeling really stressed if I'm in this prolonged thing. It's almost like a weekend before a very big university exam, and then the person you're with insists on prolonging the weekend on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. At what point are you going to stop partying and start focusing? And the person you're with just won't stop, kind of thing. If you're a conscientious person, you're going to feel like, you know what? No, we've got to knuckle down. So if we revisit the timeline, and this is quite important, before and after the one and only nomadic static video, we have the following, right? So let me just remind you. I'll get to your question in a moment. Let me just remind you that one and only nomadic static video is time-stamped August 19. So we just deal with a few questions here. Anda says she's clearly dragging him along like a handbag. Probably he had other functions that were important to her, like he would kind of provide security, he could drive, he could sometimes film her, kind of thing. He was a companion, but she probably expected him, in terms of what is important to her, to have more buy-in than he actually did have. But you should bear in mind the reading material that he was reading. It was very cynical and very anti, I'm not quite sure what one can call it, anti, capitalist, anti-society, antisocial, I don't know. So Lisa says, Nick, why do you think he left her in the hotel alone? That's a really good question. I think part of that answer may have been so that she can do a video. So there are two ways of looking at it. The one could be he leaves her because she's insisting on doing the video. And so it's like, okay, you do the video and I'll go and do something else. Or it could have been that he had to leave anyway, and then she used that opportunity with him not being around, not hanging around, not being a nuisance, not bugging her. She took that opportunity to do what she'd been meaning to do all along. Does that make sense? So it could be that he kind of said, I'm going to leave so that you can make your video. But it could also just be that he left because he was summoned home, because his father needed him to do something. And it kind of had nothing to do with that. If you imagine that Brian wasn't very happy about the video or the blog or the social media, you can imagine he came back, saw the video, and kind of didn't approve. So he may not have approved in the sense of he didn't think it was done very well. And I wouldn't be surprised if he thought that, because I thought that as well. But the important thing is that Gabby was doing something. The important thing was that she'd put something up. The important thing is that she'd produced something. And so I can imagine him seeing it and kind of being critical and it's not good enough. It wasn't good enough, but he's not helping with that attitude. And that could, so in other words, when he gets back to Salt Lake City and they're back in the van, you can imagine them immediately arguing because he's being negative and cynical. And what needs to happen is they just need to be putting up content. And it almost like will sort itself out along the way, the quality side of it. Personally, I'm not very comfortable with that. I don't like the idea of something going up that's not polished and proper. But sometimes you've got to be realistic and start somewhere. And so I think Gabby was on the right track. And I think Brian didn't think so. I think Brian wanted things to be perfect. I think Brian was a bit of not an opportunist, a bit of an idealist. Terry says, I'm thinking he didn't want her to do the video and she did it when he was gone and she had a chance. Absolutely. Anti-society, yeah. Andar says Chuck is quite a nihilistic writer. And I think some of that nihilism, some people would pronounce it nihilism. One would say Brian had some of that. You can see it in that very last post. Brian committing suicide is quite nihilistic, I think. Susan Becker, good to have you here. So let's go through the timeline. So what we want to do is locate the video and kind of get a sense of where Gabby and Brian are in terms of the video, in terms of the timeline. From there, we're going to go to Brian Laundrie and the psychological analysis. Okay. So August 12th is the Moab incident. August 13 and 14, there's likely a departure from Moab for the Bonneville Salt Flats. Bonneville is west of Salt Lake City, so you would drive from Moab to Salt Lake City or near Salt Lake City, but basically kind of bypassing Salt Lake City, but it's basically well beyond Moab. Bonneville isn't like right next to Moab, or not south of Moab, it's some distance away. And I'll tell you why it's quite important. The Salt Flats features the title image of their one and only van life video. I don't know how many people have mentioned that. It's like, so the image that Gabby and Brian, or Gabby, uses to say, this is us, I put up title images every day for my videos. You try to find the best picture to say kind of 1,000 words. You might have a title as well, but you want kind of some of the best pictures that is going to grab someone's attention. And so they obviously felt the number one picture, the first picture they're going to use is the van seen from the air. They must have used a drone to get it on these salt flats, right? And kind of telling the story of this lonely little van making its way across the wide world, and this is our adventure. It is quite an epic photo. Let's just look at some of the comments here. The sand surfing in this case gave me eerie memories of Chris Watts and Nicole. I don't actually think that, I could be wrong, I don't think that the sand dune surfing actually features anywhere in the video. And that's quite cool footage. It's quite it's adventurous, and shows them both in quite a cool light, and that's not in there at all. Actually says, is that where the van is viewed from the air? That is. Sky says, I was just typing to ask you if you have been away. Okay, so that's just somebody else. Okay, so they go from Moab to the Salt Flats, and so August 12th is the Moab incident. Then there's the aftermath. Probably they drive out of there. We know that they weren't in Moab when that double homicide happened. And so they probably decided, let's go to the next kind of tourist attraction, and it was the Bonneville Salt Flats. And I kind of get the idea that was a big deal, in terms of the visuals. They must have thought, this is what we need. We need a powerful hook to showcase our channel. We need to start the first video with a really strong start. And so the Bonneville thing ticked that box. And I agree. I think that was a good thing, but it kind of goes from Bonneville to, I think, a beach in California, and then it's not even the summer epic. I think Gabby was in a rush to get started, and I don't blame her. But I think they kind of needed to have videos up long before then, and then also capture the epic stuff kind of thing. So as I say, the Salt Flats features the title image of their one and only van life video. Now we go to August 17th. This is 5 days after the Moab incident. That's when Brian flies to Florida. Brian is literally not with Gabby. This is so important. Brian is literally not with Gabby while she compiles the video. So the one and only video she makes happens when he's not there. It's not that the one and only video she makes happens when he is there, happens with his help, happens with his cooperation. It's almost like when he's not there, she actually manages to get going. And what might feature in her thinking is she might be thinking, Brian's not helping, and so maybe Brian shouldn't be with me. And maybe she said that to him. Maybe she said, you know what, I need to put up another video, I need to do this. If you're not gonna be part of the solution, if you're not gonna help that to happen, then maybe you should go home, or maybe I should travel with someone else or alone, right? And I think she would have been totally justified in saying that. I certainly would have felt that if, like, wow, when you weren't here, I was able to do all of that. You need to be part of helping me get this done. And you can imagine him taking exception to it, but you can also imagine her realizing that she's able to be productive when he is out of the picture, right? So August 21, Gabby's father orders her Uber Eats while she's still staying at the Fairfield Inn and Suites. And I think that is such an interesting moment in the timeline. I think it's interesting because it's possible Gabby was working so hard that she forgot that she didn't have money, or she wasn't even eating. I've been in that place where you work so hard that by the time you want to eat, you sort of realize there's no food, or you need to eat right now, and kind of thing. I'm actually going to tell you a funny story about Ivy and exactly that happening today. I'll get to that in a second. But the other thing that I think is quite interesting is where Gabby's staying. She's staying at, like she's talking about downsizing, but she's staying in quite a luxurious hotel. And I really would like to know about that, like whose idea was to stay there? Who is paying for them staying at this luxurious hotel? I mean, if they didn't have any money, who was paying for them? It's possible that either Brian felt bad about the Moab incident and sort of wanted to put Gabby up in style, or it's possible that Gabby used her own money. We know that she did have her own money. Or it's possible that, what's the other option? That I don't know how likely this is, but it's possible that Gabby's parents or Brian's parents or someone's parents knew about the Moab incident, or knew that the couple were struggling and decided to sort of give them a break, give them a little bit of a chance to, for Gabby to be pampered, kind of thing. And so I seem to be back. Sorry, there was a little bit of buffering there. So yes, her dad paid for the Uber Eats. I'm asking who paid for the stay at the hotel, kind of thing. I just think it's quite an interesting question. Then you go a day or two after that, and by this time Brian has come back. Brian was away for a week. Now bear in mind, 2 days after Brian leaves, Gabby puts up the video, right? Brian's gone for 2 days. He flies out on the 17th, and you can imagine Gabby working all day on the 18th and maybe part of the 19th, and the video goes up on the 19th. So she must have worked really, really hard on the 18th. And then she probably was still working on the blog to take her to the 21st, and that's when her father orders her Uber Eats. And then Brian returns about a week later. He's in Florida for a week. He returns. That's when Gabby has her final FaceTime call with her mother. And after this point, her mother says that they texted a lot. And so you can almost imagine that this FaceTime happens when they about to kind of like leave the hotel, or they about to hit the road again, like a proper FaceTime, and then you're not really going to have the opportunity to do that. Then it takes us to August 24th. Gabby and Brian leave Salt Lake City, heading for the Grand Teton National Park. Gabby's mom says they spent just a day or two in Wyoming. So it's a day or two from August 24th, right? And 3 days later, so just 3 days after leaving Salt Lake City, another way of seeing it is just 3 days after Brian rejoins Gabby, Gabby's murdered. And so one wonders, how did this video play into that, if at all? Did Brian not approve of the video going up? Did he not approve of what the video, the quality of it? Did he arrive for Gabby just to say, you know what, when you were away, I was so productive, and I want to continue being productive, kind of thing. And so the other thing was, so I say she's murdered just 8 days after the video goes up, but also in the run up to Rose Davis possibly joining them through Yellowstone as part of her 21st birthday. So that was another thing that I think was troubling Brian, is Rose doesn't really approve of him. And Gabby may have been thinking, and bear in mind, Rose actually said in the one interview that she gave, she said, a fiance should support their fiance. You know what I mean? A fiance should be supportive, meaning Brian should have supported what Gabby wanted. What did Gabby want? Well, to put up the blog and to do the social media. So one can imagine that Rose would have been supportive. Wouldn't Rose have been a better companion? Wouldn't Rose have helped Gabby do what Gabby wanted to do? And so Brian may have legitimately felt, up until that moment, Brian may have felt he's in control, he can kind of push Gabby around, he can call the shots. But the moment it's possible that Rose is going to come onto the scene, he may have thought, I could actually be replaced. I could actually not even be part of the van life thing, even though I built the van, even though da-da-da-da-da. In other words, things have deteriorated to such an extent that Gabby may have felt, I'm not sure I want you with me. I'm not sure I'm not sure this is going to be a successful enterprise as long as you're part of it, just because you're not part of it, you're not into it, you're not on board. And although all of that's true, it may have been a huge shock for Brian to sort of realize not just that Gabby's sort of having a change of heart and she's uncertain, but that she might actually replace him with somebody else. That's almost worse. And so he's starting to get the sense of, I'm losing control. I'm losing control of Gabby. And if Rose gets out, I'm going to lose complete control. Rose is going to talk Gabby out of having me in this partnership. So let's look at some of your points. And says, I think it's hard to kill someone with your bare hands without ever once thinking about it first. So that is also something that came up in the Jill Peckham case. The journalist covering it said, you know what, I think he just snapped. And I seem to remember the same journalist saying this on Twitter, and I kind of went after him. And because I'm really allergic to that. I think it's very ill-considered. I think it's just not very smart. It just shows you don't really know true crime very well. You don't know the criminal mind, because it very, very seldom happens that way. Do you think in the Barry Morphew case that somebody just snapped? Do you think in the Chris Watts case, knowing what we know, that somebody just snapped? And so while I was watching this documentary, sorry to jump back into the Jill Peckham thing, but I had a strong suspicion that if this axe had been used as a murder weapon, that the idea for this came from another case. In other words, there's intertextuality. And so I went back and I checked, and so I saw that Jill Peckham was murdered on February 22nd, 2018 with an axe. Possibly, they didn't find DNA, but they did find the axe in suspicious setup. And it was suspicious enough to be mentioned specifically in the documentary. It does fit the possible instrument that could have caused this blunt force scenario. When I looked at the Henry van Bedau coverage, it started a long time ago, January 2015. So 3 years prior to Jill Peckham's murder, but this is important. The trial, which would have made national news on a daily basis, started on April 2017, 4 April 2017, basically a year prior to a murder. So you have a year of all of these newspaper headlines about this ex-murderer and what is going on with the case. And then the cross-examination of Henry took place in November 2017, right? So Henry's cross-examined in November 2017. Joel Peckham was murdered within 3 months of that cross-examination. That cross-examination also made daily news headlines. Ultimately, he was sentenced in June 2018. That's after the murder of Joel Peckham. In other words, if Henry had been convicted and sentenced before, you would think, wow, I don't really think the murderer would be like, oh, well, this guy just got actually caught. The murder took place after Henry's testimony, but before sentencing and conviction, if that makes sense. And so I strongly suspect that Rob Peckham, I think it's possible that Rob Peckham got the idea of doing something to his wife from the Henry van Breda case, and he may have seen the axe in the garage and thought, wow, maybe I could use this axe. Maybe I could do something with this axe. Does that make sense? And so I don't think it was that this guy snapped. And in the same way, I don't think that Brian Laundrie snapped, because part of what was slowly snapping him, was that he was almost married to Gabby, that he'd asked her to marry him. She'd said she would marry him. They were in this exclusive relationship, and then they didn't get married, and then they went on this van life honeymoon, and then that didn't work out. That wasn't working out. So he was finding that this dream turning into a nightmare. He's finding this amazing thing where it was going to be this fairy tale, and this beautiful partner that he had was somehow kind of incontrovertibly pulling away from him. He just wasn't able to keep her in the relationship. And so, again, you've got to ask the question, if you look at the motive with Peckham, and you look at the motive with Chris Watts, and you look at the motive with, in the Suzanne Morphew case, possible motive, and you look at the motive in Gabby Petito, it's the effort to control either someone who wants to leave or someone who wants to stay. So in other words, it's either trying to create an instant divorce so that you can be with somebody else, or it's trying to almost, how can I put it, if somebody loves you and they then say they don't love you, and you are desperately in love, it can kind of feel like your best friend now becomes your biggest enemy, if that makes sense. If you're in that really desperate position of loving someone, and they're not only the most important person in your life, they're your only friend, they're they're the be-all, end-all, then that person can go from being the most important person in your universe to the most undermining person in your universe. They suddenly completely invalidate you. Does that make sense? Ando says some men just won't be broken up with. Some women too. Actually says, I think she realized she didn't need him. He was a drag on her. It could also be that he'd put so much into the relationship, she'd demanded so much, and when she felt the sense of uncertainty, that was very infuriating for him. And also the fact that she has her own mind, that she wants to do certain things a certain way. Sky says, do you not think anyone could not just lose it, kill, and then bitterly regret it? Say if someone ridiculed them and they just lost it. Not Brian specifically, just in general. For me, the big clue to why something's not just snapping is if you totally randomly snap, then you can imagine feeling regret, remorse, confessing on the spot, being completely overwhelmed. And in other words, if you just snap, there's no plan afterwards. In other words, if you just snap, you do something terrible, and then it's like you immediately confess, and it's all over, like immediately everybody knows exactly what happened. But if you have a situation where something happens and then there's instant cover-up and instant kind of a plan that is executed, and the person doesn't seem to show any emotion, any appropriate emotion, that suggests that prior to the incident, somebody resigned themselves also in an emotional way to what they were going to do. In other words, they prepared themselves emotionally, committed the crime, and then after the crime were able to manage their emotions because they'd resigned themselves to what they were going to do, which was with deliberation. Does that make sense? So the planning and the covering up and the staging, bear in mind there's quite a lot of staging in this crime. Brian used Gabby's card. Money was obviously an issue for him. Brian staged things off her phone. Brian appeared at home in her van. He didn't fly home. He could have flown home. Comes home with her van and appears normal for a while. And that all suggests that at some point he resigned himself to what he was doing. He may have thought about what he's going to do and then not act on it quite a few times, and then eventually did act on it. I think a good way to think about this, so if you want to think about just snapping, is try to imagine that this crime isn't murder, that it's actually breaking up or divorce. Have you ever been in a relationship where you get a sense that I don't want to be in this relationship anymore, or I want to get divorced, or this isn't working, but then you don't act on it, but then it comes back and you get that feeling again, this really isn't working out, but you don't do anything, or you do something and then it kind of backfires or whatever. But the point is, you want to make a big decision, you want to make an executive decision that's going to have consequences, and then you don't do anything, and then you postpone it and you delay it, right? Do you know what I'm saying? So in other words, think about divorce. Is that something you just snap and the next thing you divorce? Or do you premeditate a divorce? Do you think about it, comes up again and again? You play with the idea in your mind. Do you get what I'm saying? You must know that murder is such a big decision. It's kind of like a divorce as well. It was like a divorce in the Chris Watts case. Chris Watts definitely premeditated his crime. He'd probably thought about it in an offhand way for a long time, perhaps as long as a year, but only started planning it within a couple of weeks, right? Stephanie says, and I put a lot of thought into it. I ended an engagement. I was also in a situation like that, not quite engaged, but very close to getting married. And there were many situations where I thought, is now a good time to break this off? Also, if I break this off, is that going to happen? Blah, 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 blah. So something like permanently ending a relationship, that is what this boils down to. So are you really telling me that Brian just snapped when he permanently ended the relationship. If you think that, you just don't understand the criminal mind. You just don't understand how human beings think. It might be tempting to think Brian's a monster, so he doesn't think like a normal person, but that is not how people think. And so even with the Peckham case, even though this ultimatum came up at one point, I think that Rob didn't like never really having any money. I think he felt sometimes frustrated by his wife who held the purse strings, and this was a way to instantly get, control of the purse strings. Do you have a similar situation to that in the Barry Morphew case? Who knows? But it is about control, and control suggests it's not about snapping. It's about control, right? Absolutely, Karina. You work yourself up to it. You must, one step closer each time. You've also got to have that anxiety. You've got to have that anxiety, making it urgent and making it critical and making it time sensitive. So I hope you found that kind of somewhat insightful. I just want to now take you through what this episode promised to deal with. And I'm going to try and wrap it up in the next 10 minutes. Titanic discussions. Okay. As others have said, at some level, Brian must have known Gabby was way, way out of his league. They got together young before she was fully aware of her attractiveness. He must have foreseen the negative comments. Very good point. Thanks very much for the $20. I do think that Brian was aware of his lack of physical attractiveness. Something that I noticed, I don't know if you guys noticed it, there are some photos of Gabby where she looks like a sweet young girl. She sort of looks not particularly pretty, but just like kind of a sweet youngster, right? And then there are others. There's that one image of her where she looks particularly stunning. She just looks really, really beautiful, where she's sort of got like, there's a background behind her of sort of trees, and she's wearing kind of a sweater, and her hair's sort of long. I don't know, and you can kind of get the sense that, she's kind of becoming really, really beautiful. And at the same time that this is happening, Brian's not becoming beautiful. Brian's actually, he's already lost all his hair. He was actually an ugly duckling at school. He's really overweight. I don't know whether he had much friends at school. Gabby was someone who could attract friends quite easily. Brian wasn't. And so, so I do think Brian had to have anticipated that social media they weren't going to fall in love with him. They're going to fall in love with her, and that was going to be a problem. She was coming into her own, as Bria says. And I think what was kind of leaving the door open for Brian was that Gabby was struggling a bit with anxiety, and Gabby was quite young, and they'd been in a relationship for quite a long time, and they did share the sort of artistic thing. But I think if she was realistic, Brian is very immature when it came to, like they were still like sort of living with his parents. He was a bit immature. He wasn't like, it was like a failure to launch situation. And Brian needed to be more financially independent, or if not, then a stronger companion to support her in what she was trying to do, kind of thing. And I just don't think he had that strength. And you can't use words like that on here. Just it automatically gets taken out. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through. So we've in a way described Brian. How can I put it? The technical side, and intellectually we understand what we're talking about, the dynamics, and also to some extent how this video coming out on the 19th, 8 days before a murder, how that relates. But now I want to take it to another level, and I want to do a psychological analysis on how this violent outburst could have happened. What is the mechanism of it? Like how, so we've said he didn't snap, but I think there is still snapping. There is still all of this negative energy, all of this frustration and aggression, all of this insecurity, all of this anxiety. But then what? How does it actually happen? What is actually going on? And so don't laugh, but where I got the inspiration for this, and it's a bit unfortunate that so much time has gone by, because I was so inspired, and I was like, wow, what an epiphany. So some of that momentum and that thinking that was so at the tip of my tongue has been lost a little bit because of the time going by, the delays. But how many of you watched Daniel Medvedev playing Rafa Nadal in the Australian Open final? How many of you watched that? I don't see any responses. I guess nobody did. How many of you watched the Australian Open final? So Axie says no. Karina says bits of it. Terry Dean says some of it. It was quite long because it was a 5-setter. Okay, I think I'm going to have to get the clip that I'm looking for. So I'm going to put these links. You can either watch it now or you can watch it later. Robbie says no. Andor says did not see it. So here's the first link. And this one I think has video. Actually, you're right. One of the players did lose it. So if you'd watched it and I was starting to talk about this, you'd probably be like, oh, I know what he's going to say now. I know what he's kind of getting at. What I'm getting at is in the final, there was a 45-second tirade where the second seed just totally lost it. He just had a massive temper tantrum. He had this huge outburst. It lasted about 45 seconds. And it was shocking for a couple of reasons. You didn't expect this guy to totally unload on the umpire. You know, at one point he was screaming at the umpire, look at me, look at me when I'm talking to you. And he just kind of went on, and like there was a point where you thought, wow, that was bad, and then it got worse and it got worse. And it was something that you probably haven't seen very often on a tennis court. And the important part to sort of address is Daniel Medvedev seems like kind of a nerd. He's a very odd tennis player. He's very thin and kind of nerdy. He's just a very unlikely champion. And just the way he plays just seems very, very odd. And he also kind of seems like a quiet, soft, introverted guy. He's apparently a very intelligent guy. I don't know if he went to engineering school or something, but he's apparently one of the smartest tennis players. So he's kind of like a nerd tennis player, and he's a smart player, but the important thing is that he suddenly behaved in a way that nobody expected, and it was just totally shocking and frightening how he went from he'd won the first two sets against Nadal, and then he was sort of halfway through the third set and the tide was sort of turning, and then he did go on to lose the last three sets and the final ultimately, right? And so what I thought was so amazing about him snapping, because that is what he did, what I thought was so amazing about that was it was like, when did it happen? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And I just wondered, can one relate this? I know it's totally different. It's a tennis player, but what we're trying to look at is the mechanism of someone. It doesn't have to be a tennis player, but in this case it is. The mechanism of someone completely becoming unhinged, right? And what is useful with this particular tennis match is we'd watched the journey of this guy all along. We'd watched him, progress through the various stages. So you had a narrative showing you what was happening. And so you could now do an analysis to say, this is why this guy totally snapped. And then the question is, and I know this is a tennis player, it's very different to what happened with Gabby and Brian. The question is the psychological mechanism similar? And I'm going to leave it to you to decide that. You really do need to watch the footage because it'll put the hairs on the back of your neck up. It's just like, really, this guy's really enraged. He's really, really, really angry. And it's kind of that anger that you think about when you have someone who's very, very introverted, who doesn't show a lot of emotion, and then suddenly you kind of seeing this other side to them. Right? Terry says, thank you for this, Nick. Hearing you reference the laundry in your recent Morphe video made me hungry for more. Okay, thanks a lot, Terry. Okay, so here we go. Now, we are using this outburst that we saw during this tennis match, and we're asking the question, is there psychological intertextuality here? Can we apply this to Brian or not? And so these are the things that played into this huge outburst, right? And I'm going to go through 8 points. And what I want you to do is think about the scenario. It's actually better if you're watching this on replay, you should really pause the video, watch that tennis player go ballistic, watch that, and then come back maybe at this point. But anyway, so let me just put up the video again. I think you can watch him. I think there's a link here. Yeah. Let me just pull this up. So you can either go to this link and read a little bit about it. There is a video link in this link, or you can watch it at this link. It's been viewed almost 2.5 million times, so it's really kind of gone viral. So if you're watching this on replay, now might be a good time to stop and watch that particular link that I've just put there. So what's very important is to know the context of why this happened, when it happened, and why this happened, how it happened. And so the first point to make is expectation. The tennis player went into this tennis match expecting to win. It would, I think, be his first Grand Slam final win, so the stakes are really high. but his expectations are very high of himself. He's progressed to the final, and quite a lot is going on. Besides that, the scenario is that Rafa will be winning his 21st Grand Slam, and going into this particular tournament, Rafa Nadal, Roger Federer, and Novak Djokovic each had 20, 20 Grand Slams each. So if Medvedev could win this final, then in a weird way is breaking through this legendary kind of domination. On the other hand, if Nadal wins, he then surpasses that sort of 20-20-20 tie, right? But the bottom line is there's huge expectation, and Medvedev is really trying to break through, and he is expecting to win. And so far he is winning. He's won the first two sets, not even struggling to win them. He wins them quite comfortably, quite easily. So he's got great momentum, and it looks like he's actually going to wrap this up in 3 sets, in 3 straight sets. And then things start to not work out the way that he expects. Things start to happen that he doesn't anticipate. Things start to happen that upsets his expectation. Basically, Rafa starts to fight back. Rafa starts to gain a bit of a foothold. And this actually rattles the other tennis player, right? What happened, Stephanie? Stephanie says, my computer is buffering, trying to go out and come back. I did buffer it for a little while. I don't know, my picture is definitely quite fuzzy. Do I appear quite fuzzy on your picture? Don't know if it's the internet connection. Oh, much better, okay. If it is buffering, just, I think, do what Stephanie did. Go out and come back. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's the number one thing, is expectation. That's something I could have told you as somebody who, as a young person, went to England with my girlfriend and also had really high expectations. And the real world tends to be not, especially when you're young, the real world tends to be a little bit disappointing. People tend to be a little bit disappointing, especially if you've got high standards and you a perfectionist and whatever, and you've got high expectations, you're very likely to be disappointed. I'm just trying to think of a movie where somebody has the attitude of always expect things to go wrong and you'll never be disappointed. Just trying to think what that film was. I just can't. Anyway, so that's the number one thing that is facing this particular tennis player. He's caught up in his own expectations, and that's great. Expectations are great for as long as your expectations are met. It's like everything is all going according to plan. Everything is as expected, right? It's when your expectations aren't met and suddenly things aren't going the way you expect that this controlling thing starts kicking in, and it's also like, wow, what's going on here? And so what this tennis player kind of is experiencing is, you know what? I was in control of this game. I was in control of this match. Now I'm not. And suddenly he feels afraid, but he's also starting to feel angry and frustrated. And suddenly, from that feeling of almost naive confidence, because he's not had to deal with any problems, now suddenly the pendulum has swung, and now suddenly he's almost he's kind of paranoid, right? And so you should ask yourself, is that what Brian was going on? Is that what was going on with Brian? Did he have high expectations of Gabby? Did he have high expectations of himself and Gabby? And so he's going with Gabby, and it's going to be this great van life trip. But then somewhere along the line, it's like, yeah, but we've got to make videos. We've got to blog. We've got to do social media. And he's thinking, you know what? I've already won the first 2 sets. We had such a great time in this national park. We had such a great time there. You know, it was such a nice time camping. But now my expectations aren't being met. Now my fiance wants to do other stuff that I don't really want to do. He's starting to lose control. His expectations of her are being challenged. And part of that is also happening with Gabby, where she's like, you know what, I thought on this trip we are going to do these things, but we're also going to do the social media. And so she's expecting him to be part of that. And so her expectations also aren't being met. So it's also her emotional reaction to that. But let's just stay on Brian's side. So in terms of this tennis player, there's this expectation that he's going to win, and then suddenly after 2.5 sets, that is thrown into question, and then he feels differently. He suddenly snaps out of that feeling of confidence and assurance to something else. So that's the first thing. Expectation. The second one is losing face. So I can't quite remember what it was, but there were a couple of incidents where I don't know what it was, if the ball landed on the line, or I think a big thing that happened in the final was, and not only in that tennis game, but across the tournament, this particular player didn't get a lot of crowd support. So he was kind of being booed and maligned and jeered at, while other players were obviously the favorites of the crowd. And so effectively he's losing face. And so you might say losing face isn't a big deal in one game, but if you've been going through that in all these games and you go into the final with this expectation and then you start to lose, and the crowd are now cheering for the opponent all the time. Loud cheers for the opponent, almost no cheers for you. Cheers when you make a mistake, or when your opponent makes a mistake. And so there's this perception that you are losing face, that in the arena, the public are making it absolutely clear who they like and who they don't like. And wasn't that going on with Brian as well? Wasn't that going on also in the public arena? Brian was effectively being booed. Gabby was being cheered. Brian is losing face in that situation. And this is getting these juices to build up, right? As I say, it's not just losing face in this particular game, although it is this game, but it's also that it was happening prior to that. And we also know with Brian that he was losing face, with Gabby's father perhaps saying, we're not going to let you get married now, you're too young, or whatever. The other thing I want to mention, maybe not a very nice thing to say, all of those champions of the ATP tennis are kind of charismatic and quite good looking. Roger Federer, very good looking guy. Rafa, good looking. Novak Djokovic, pretty good looking. And then this guy's very ordinary looking. He just doesn't look like a tennis player. And so he's got to deal with that, the fact that he's being judged by his appearance. And the reality is that it is a reality. And the reality is that it is making him feel a certain way. He's feeling this isn't fair. And maybe it isn't fair, but some people can deal with it. Is he able to deal with it? The next thing to mention is that with this expectation and the losing face, there's like a pendulum swing. He goes from winning to losing. He goes from being confident and emotionally in control and in his where he wants to be, to he completely loses it. And he admitted after he lost the final, when there was a press conference, he admitted that was a mistake. He admitted that going off the way he did was a mistake, right? He nevertheless makes this mistake for 45 seconds. And then he sort of also complained about the ball boys. I think he always wanted the ball to be thrown on the one side. And you can have quite an interesting discussion about, because Rafa Nadal also has OCD kind of going on. He likes things done a particular way. I think he feels like he can't step over the white lines on the tennis court with his left foot. It's always got to be his right foot. And so he's quite OCD about that. And you could make the argument, is that maladaptive? And I suppose you could say, being afraid to touch a line, maybe that helps him not hit the ball onto the line. Maybe there's a subconscious thing going on there. But ultimately, it comes down to, how did the one player deal with his anxiety, and how did the other player deal with it? How did the one player deal emotionally with his lack of control compared to the other player? And in any event, part of this process of this violent outburst is a pendulum swing in the fortunes of what's going on. In other words, at the moment that this player realizes or suspects that he's not going to win, or that he's not winning, that the momentum is shifting, this outburst happens. And so the question is, with Brian, was there also a pendulum swing? And the pendulum swing could have been Gabby saying, Rose is joining us, or you need to get with the program with the social media, right? You need to get with the program, because you can't be on this trip and be criticizing me. It's not going to work. And so when he rejoins her, he must perceive in some way there's a pendulum swing where she's realized, I need to reassess our relationship, and there's a chance that you're not going to be part of it. And so he suddenly realized, I'm not winning anymore. I'm not in control. I'm not where I want to be. Suzanne Becker, welcome to the Transit Lounge. Thanks for joining us. And that brings us to the fourth point, perspective. In line with this thing where there's a pendulum swing for this tennis player, where he realizes, I may not actually win this now. He's been winning, and suddenly he gets this weird epiphany. Wow, I'm not winning now. And then he does go on to lose. Is this new perspective? It's almost the same as the pendulum swing, but it's this new perspective, which is like an epiphany, where you realize, wow, this is actually what's going on. And you suddenly are seeing maybe too big a picture. Maybe he's seeing his narrative as the whole tournament, and they've been booing me the whole tournament. And maybe Brian is thinking, I've been trying to get engaged to this girl, and if it's not her father against me, it's her girlfriend Rose. And if it's not Rose, now it's her. She's starting to drink the Kool-Aid. In other words, he suddenly gets a new perspective, and that perspective is making him furious, right? Terry says money was probably more underlying than their creative dream. What was Brian doing to help fund the trip? Endo says, Susan says, could find link on iPad, had to go to my Android. Oh, okay. Well, glad you could make it. There is a link in the description to this video, but maybe you can't see it on your phone. That's if you want to join the discussion here. Ando says, I wonder what was Brian face-to-face with Gabby's parents, and if he had to answer for what he did, or did he have contempt for them? I think he may have had contempt for some of her parents, and maybe they had some contempt for him. But I got the idea that her mother thought that he was okay, her mother kind of approved. That brings us to the fifth point, power struggle. So number one is expectation. Too high expectations that are not met, but also expectations governing what is going on. In other words, you superimpose over a given situation your expectations. When those expectations aren't met, there's this devastating realization, and that creates an emotional response. There's losing face, both within the situation, but also the broader scenario. You've been losing face for a long time, and you've had enough of it. Now you're going to stand up to losing face. You are sick and tired of it. And this is what this tennis player does. He demands that what did he want the umpire to do? I think it was cheering or jeering between serves. And it was only happening with him serving or something. And he was demanding that the umpire sort of come up for him, stand up for him. Number three, there's this pendulum swing. So in terms of the fortunes of the overall game, the pendulum has suddenly swung, and that is why there's this reaction. There's this perception that things are going south, and he needs to stop that from happening. Perspective, and then number five is power struggle. In terms of the power struggle, he's also realizing he's kind of on the back foot at this point. He's been setting the pace, he's been calling the shots, he's been making the shots. Think about this in terms of tennis, but also think of it in terms of Brian. He's been in the power seat, and now, okay, I almost ended the live. I'm not quite sure why I'm having connection issues. Maybe I'm just close some windows here. Sorry about that. But yeah, so in terms of the power struggle, he starts to realize he's not wearing the pants, right? He's not holding kind of onto the power. He's not the person in control. Power, struggle, and control go hand in hand, right? And so that's also causing the fact that he's losing the power struggle is making him angry and anxious and emotional. Think about anybody in a relationship who feels like they're losing the power struggle. So you may be in a relationship that's very civil, but if it feels like your partner is becoming too powerful, or conversely, you becoming powerless, that can make you feel intimidated, resentful, angry, right? And that then brings us to number 6, high stakes. All of this would mean a lot more if you had actually followed the whole tennis tournament. All of them would be like a big bingo where you'd be like, yeah, I see what you're talking about with that. So it's unfortunate that a lot of you haven't seen it, but nevertheless, maybe you can just imagine what I'm talking about. It was very, very high stakes, this particular game, for a lot of reasons. He was ranked number 2 in the world. It would have been his first Grand Slam, all sorts of other reasons. It was also high stakes for Brian. This was the love of his life. This was his soulmate. This he kind of attached his identity, his whole sense of the world is worth living in because of this person. Well, then take the person away. Well, now the world isn't worth living in. I'm awesome because I'm with someone who's awesome. Take the awesome person away, I'm nothing, right? So it was very high stakes, the summer epic. It was high stakes for Gabby as well. She needed to make the van life thing work. It was high stakes for her as well. It was probably much higher stakes for Brian. It's quite important to bear that in mind. In the same way that Nadal had won 20 Grand Slams before, and winning the 21st was high stakes for him. it was probably nowhere near as high stakes as it was for the other player, who was hoping to win his first Grand Slam, beating this legendary player and playing really well. And so it was also high stakes for this player because he'd been resisting all the negative publicity, all the losing face, all of the, how can I put it, the undermining from the public. And so he was very resilient and emotionally strong until this particular point where it suddenly hit him. And the pressure was so much that he suddenly just lost it. So something being high stakes means the stress level is much higher than normal, right? And that then brings us to the seventh and second last point, anxiety, right? Let's just read what Terry says. Yeah, that's true. That is true. But I don't think he did that on purpose. I think he just did that out of frustration and the ball happened to hit somebody. Karina says, I told my ex-husband he could not break me and that I was just going to continue to grow stronger the weaker he became, that I would leave him. Okay, that's pretty scary. Jean says, my Wi-Fi just slowed way down too. I'm sure it's a coincidence. Axie says, I think he thought of her as a trophy. I think so too. So the anxiety for this particular player is that he's worked so hard, he's come all of this way, he's, executed according to plan, he's trained hard, and here he is, and he's doing, and he's succeeding, and then suddenly that trajectory kind of falters, right? So that's where that anxiety comes from, is I've invested so much, I put so much into this, I put so much time, life, energy, blood, sweat, and tears, so much emotion, I've made so many sacrifices, and it looks like I'm going to fail. It looks like I'm not going to get the outcome that I want. It looks like, I'm not going to triumph, I'm going to fail. And that can be a massive source of anxiety. I don't know if anxiety is even the right word there. It may actually be fear. It's that terrible sense of undoing, that terrible sense of, I put myself on the line, I've committed myself, I've given my all, and it's not enough. Life's so unfair because I've done so much, and yet the gods are still against me, or the fates are still against me, or whatever is still against me. I just can't break through. I've done everything and it's still not enough, still not good enough. I'm not good enough. And that can be a horrible realization. I think we've all had it. It's just a sense that no matter what I do, it's not enough. And you want to give up. And that makes you feel kind of angry because you feel like it shouldn't be this way. It should be enough. I want my happily ever after. I've worked hard and I deserve it. I expect it. Why is it not happening? And so when there's that sort of, it's kind of like a intelligence. It's kind of like a realization it's not going to happen. I've done everything and it's not, I'm not measuring up. I'm not, for whatever reason, I'm not going to win this. And that should fill you with fear because it means, losing something, failure is hard to bear. It's definitely hard to bear. It means wasted time. It means you're not good enough. It means what you did wasn't good enough. And it means losses and losses and losses. And so with a tennis player, when you have two tennis players fighting it out, and they go all the way to the final, and then they have a 5-setter, and it's 50-50, and then one of them has to lose, that can be gut-wrenching. That can be absolutely a horrifying place to be. And some tennis players don't recover from that. They don't recover their confidence. They just don't get the sense of, well, it could have gone the other way. It's like, I'm not good enough or whatever. And that can be part of the fear, is that if I lose this game, I may not be able to pick myself up again. And I'll take this into Brian and Gabby, the sense of, I've given everything that I can. Maybe it's not completely true. Like, for it to be true, Brian would have had to say, you know what, I actually supported Gabby completely with her blog, except he didn't. You know what, I really helped Gabby put that video up. Well, except he didn't. He went to Florida when she put the video up. But he may have felt, I've got everything riding on this relationship. I've given up on whatever, and I've embarked on this van life thing. I've been very uncomfortable. I've been very dirty. I've been, it's been very difficult, but I've done it because I love this person. It feels like I've given everything, and now it's a failure. It's actually not going to end happily ever after. This fairy tale, what's supposed to be the honeymoon, is actually going to be the ruin of our relationship. If we'd never gone on the van life thing, maybe blah, 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 blah. And so that's where the anxiety comes from. The fear is you put so much into it and it doesn't work anyway. How are you gonna pick yourself up after this? How are you going to live? What are you going to do with this defeat? Is there any coming back from it? And when you're a young person, maybe also a young tennis player, you may legitimately feel, maybe quite true in that context, that there is no coming back from this. You should actually go and try something else. And the tennis player we're talking about here literally said at the press conference afterwards that the crowd was so negative to me. The crowd was so mean, basically, that he's literally considering giving up tennis, or he's not going to play certain tournaments. But basically that's the impact that this negativity had on him. And I think that is something of what Brian felt as well, that with all of this happening, the expectation losing face, the swinging of the pendulum, the change of perspective, losing the power struggle, the high stakes, the anxiety, the fear that was part of this all along. And then he feels like, I'm not going to succeed with this relationship. I don't have it. I don't have enough. I don't have enough to keep her. That horrible fear of, what happens after this? Can I pick myself up? Is there any chance that I'm going to meet someone anything like this person? And then number 8, the final point, losing control. So all of those things almost together amount to, I actually can't control the outcome here. And so with the tennis player as well, all of these things building onto each other amounts to him losing control, screaming at the umpire because the penny's kind of dropped that he's starting to lose, and then he does go on to lose. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so with Brian as well, when he when he gets the sense that he's losing control of Gabby, we don't know exactly how or why he loses control of Gabby. But the Moab incident provides us with a lot of intel in that regard. The fact that he wasn't supporting her with the social media, but for whatever reason, he realizes that he's losing control of Gabby, and that combined with all these other things makes him extremely unstable and angry and violent. And this leads to this outburst, just as you had possibly with this tennis player. The mechanism of it, the mechanism of this violent outburst are all these things agitating and compounding on one another, and then you just overcome by it. But it's not one thing. So what I guess I'm getting at is you are snapping It is a point of inflection. It is a point of a breaking point, but it's something that built over time with a lot of things that are part of that. Not just the expectations of this match, but the expectations in general. Not just Brian's expectations of van life, but of the whole engagement, of his whole relationship. Not just losing face with Gabby, but losing face with social media. Not just this tennis player losing face in terms of his own game, but everybody watching makes it a million times worse. Brian probably also felt everybody's watching, and now must everybody see our relationship's not working. And that is ultimately what happened. Susan says, unless you're very self-confident, the power struggle could drag you down. Okay, so I hope you guys have found this interesting. I think, again, if you'd watched the whole tournament and you'd watched this tennis player's growth through it, then you could kind of see the point where it was so devastating to him. I must say, I didn't particularly, when he did what he did, I was like, wow, that is... Yeah, I don't want to say too much about that, but it was pretty shocking. But you realize what is actually going on beneath the surface, where he actually seemed really calm, and he seemed like it didn't seem like too much was going on beneath the surface, and then you realize, wow, a lot is going on beneath the surface, right? Stephanie, thanks so much. You may be taking a sabbatical from writing, but your narration is like an audiobook. Thank you for the deep dives in your lives. Well, thanks a lot for that. I am taking a sabbatical from my writing. Someone actually asked me the other day, what book am I working on now? And I was like, I'm not writing. And I kind of got the sense that they thought I'm all washed up and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, it's quite difficult to explain. Anyway, yeah, but anyway, I'm not writing, and I've never been happier. It's not quite true, but anyway. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow's live on Vincent van Gogh. I don't know, I'm really quite looking forward to it. I'm enjoying these episodes, so don't miss it. The third chapter in Martin Bailey's book is titled Nests, and I'll have a different background for you. It also comes from my bedroom. It also is a painting from Orvez Suaz, and promises to be a pretty interesting episode. What's also quite interesting is after that chapter, there's a fourth chapter dealing with the portrait of Dr. Gachet. So we're going to be coming back to Dr. Gachet via Martin Bailey again. Stephanie, you have a good memory. So I've got two stories to tell you about Ivy. The first one is I just really didn't feel like my own food, my own cooking, and I was really hungry, and I kind of had to head out to where I was going anyway. So I ordered it's quite a kind of boutique restaurant. It's sort of health food. And so I ordered a wrap. I ordered it was called a protein pot. It's sort of got egg and spinach and some sausage inside. It's quite nice. And then I also ordered a smoothie. It was pretty expensive. For me, it was pretty expensive, probably about $15. I don't know if you would think that's expensive, but so I drove all the way there, ordered it, did my errand, got the stuff, came all the way home. let the cat out the front door into the garden, decided to have my lunch on the patio, outside kind of in the garden. So now I'm pretty hungry. I'm really, really hungry. I don't know if I had breakfast this morning even. And then I took kind of like 3 sort of forkfuls of this protein pot. It's spinach and egg and sausage. And I put it's not really a pot, it's just a container. I put the container on the armrest of my chair. Robbie says, I can see where this is going. Where do you think this is going, Robbie? So I've taken like 1 or 2 little bites of this meal. I put the container on my armrest of the chair and sort of lean forward and take a sip of the smoothie. And because it's kind of thickish smoothie, I kind of need to take a slow sip, right? And while I'm taking the slow sip, the cat sort of pops up on his hind legs and pats the container, throwing all of the food on the ground. I'm telling you, I was not impressed. I'd gone all the way there. I was starving. I paid a pretty penny for that particular meal. And I just managed to kind of start eating it when the cat threw it over on the ground. And I don't know, the cat was almost like, I don't know, like almost like a psychopath. It was almost like the cat went, hee, yay, and then sort of ran off. It was almost like, I don't know, just not fun. So think about that in terms of just having a basic expectation. I'm going to have lunch, and then all those things. I didn't snap, but I certainly got very upset very, very quickly, because in that little scenario, you've lost control. Something else has taken control, right? So that's the one little thing. Fortunately, I did have a wrap, and I managed to eat that whole thing without incident. I'm going to tell you something very gross. My critics will use this against me, but I guess it's okay. So some of my meal fell on the ground, and I was so desperate to make it work. I'm not going to lose this entire meal. I did scoop up some of the food, obviously not all of it, but I did scoop up some of the food that had landed on the ground. It's not like soiled, just patio, and kind of ate some of it. That's how kind of desperate I was to salvage the situation. Fortunately, I didn't taste any pebbles or sticks or anything. So I did get I did salvage a little bit of the food, but that's kind of how I felt like. Anyway, a bit of a desperate thing to do, eat food off the ground, whatever. So that's the one story. The other story is just kind of just random and kind of odd. I think you guys know that I've had a bit of a spasm in my back. I think it's a combination of sleeping on the one side and sort of cramping the whole night you're sleeping with your shoulder kind of crushed kind of thing. And it's a combination of that, and I've been training quite a lot, cycling and swimming, and I think that's just put a lot of strain on my shoulder, whatever. And so while I was sort of after I watched this documentary on Peckham, I took off my shirt and my girlfriend rubbed, it's called Deep Heat, but it's like this cream that it makes it feel like your skin is on fire. It's got a pepperminty sort of smell. So, but anyway, she starts rubbing this cream into my shoulder, and the next thing, Ivy sort of jumps off her perch and and bear in mind I don't have my shirt on, and she's like right by my side, right? Menthol. And then the weirdest thing happened. She started sort of licking me, but like not one lick or two licks. She must really like, like some people like peppermint. Well, here is a cat, a Russian blue, that seems to really like menthol. So I don't know have you guys ever experienced that? Although I was being rubbed on my upper shoulder, the cat was sort of licking me kind of on my side. And I think she just really liked that smell and maybe associated almost like, like you get menthol tea or mint tea, something like that. So I don't know. Ivy definitely has a kind of a craving for that. But I just thought that was really odd. You talk about human psychology, you talk about criminal psychology. Well, that's cat psychology that I didn't know about. I didn't know that cats are into menthol. Did you know that, Timmy? Timmy, come. Timmy, come. Come. Timmy definitely needs a proper shearing. You can barely see his eyes these days, although I think from this angle you can see them. Hey, Timmy. Timmy. Timmy, say hello. He definitely needs a shave, not just because he's stinky, but because it's really, really hot. It's really, really, really hot. So Ivy has a distinct taste for sure. That's for sure. I think that's Madeleine's first comment here. Madeleine, have you just joined us? Cat mint. Yeah. Maybe she was trying to get on my good side. Okay. Well, this is a lot longer than I thought it would be. I actually thought it would be 90 minutes. It's been an hour longer than that. Anyway, thanks a lot for everyone who's joined us, especially the new members. Susan, I know, has recently joined us. Welcome, Susan. As I say, don't forget tomorrow's Van Gogh, the Van Gogh series. It'll be about a little bit earlier than this next, or tomorrow, around about 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll see you guys then. Make sure you view the video to see that outburst, and you can maybe also read the article if you're interested. Actually says what time? Should be about 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Terry says, thank you all so much. I'm honored to be part of the TCRS community. We're honored to have you. We are honored to have you with us. Timmy, let's give her a round of applause. Okay. Stephanie says that works. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay. Stephanie says, this has been really nice tonight. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. Okay, guys, it's coming up to 20 to 2 in the morning. I need to get some shut-eye before my sleeping patterns get messed up again, get messed up too much. Timmy says good night. I think he definitely wants to go get some sleep. Hey, Timmy. I do too. So thank you, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for listening. Let me just first, or last of all, thank all, you guys for the super chats. There were some pretty cool super chats. Thanks very much for that. I just want to make sure I'd say that. And Endo says, oh my God, go to bed. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for joining me. It's been a good session, I think. I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.